Whether you call it Kveik, Kvik, or Kvike, there's no denying that this unique Norwegian yeast has had a remarkable impact on the brewing scene, and Imperial Yeast's A43 Loki is one of the best versions out there. With the ability to produce a clean beer when fermented as warm as 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, you heard that right, while also performing well at more standard ale temperatures, Imperial Yeast A43 Loki is as versatile as it gets, meaning you have zero excuses for failing to brew throughout the year. Learn more about A43 Loki at imperialyeast.com and grab a pouch for your next batch to see what all the fuss is about. For the better part of the last couple centuries, beer was made with four primary ingredients. You know them well: water, barley, hops, and yeast. Of course, some brewers learned that adding certain other things led to a beer with desirably unique characteristics. Take, for example, the classic Belgian wit beer that's typically made with coriander and orange peel. Still, adjunct-laden beers were generally an exception to the rule. But such does not seem to be the case these days. You are listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this Brews Views episode to discuss our unabashed thoughts on and opinions on dessert beer is contributor Andy Carter.
Yeah, I've definitely had a few of these in my life, and they only seem to have grown in popularity. It's kind of interesting. I think they first were seen as kind of, this is a gimmicky or something like that. But, it turns out kind of like how hazy IPA, it's a gimmick. People like it. It tastes good. And when you make a good example, it really elevates, I think, the style and, the quality of the beverage. So I think they're here to stay. And I think there's some cool or maybe not so cool things about them that we can talk about today.
Absolutely. I think I've made it quite clear over the last few years that I'm a beer-flavored beer guy. But that doesn't mean I'm closed-minded or closed off to new things. Sure, I may be, inclined to order a pint of crisp, clear Pilsner or a classic American Pale Ale if it's available. But over the last few years, I have sampled my fair share of modern adjunct-laden dessert beers, or what I believe some people might call pastry beers. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. And I have developed some opinions on this modern trend that I'm looking forward to chatting about with you, Andy. Real quick, back in episode 158, Andy and I did share our views on brewing with adjuncts in general. And since its release, we've received a number of requests to do a show focused more specifically on the dessert beer trend. That's why we're doing this one today. And just as a reminder, this is a Brews Views episode, meaning we're not going to censor ourselves as much as we usually do. So if certain language is something that bothers you, you may want to sit this episode out. All right. If you enjoy this show and you'd like to make sure it sticks around, consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy, where in return for making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. For this month, September of 2021, that guest is Colin Kaminsky, who in addition to brewing professionally at Napa's Downtown Joe's Brewery and co-authoring the Water Book with John Palmer, is also responsible for introducing all of us to the concept of vitality starters. Yep, it was Colin who messaged me a few years ago with this idea he'd read about in some research paper and proposed an experiment, which we did, and the rest is history. He's such a good dude. This is going to be a very good session. In order to be a part of it, you have to make your pledge at patreon.com/brewlosophy by September 24th, 2021. At the latest, as Colin is going to be taking questions in the private Facebook page on Saturday, the 25th. As a patron at this level, you'll also have access to all past sessions with guests like Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo and Grandmaster BJCP Judge Gordon Strong, and many, many more. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support. When shopping online, your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers beautiful stainless gear such as the turnkey BH15 Pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that is brewershardware.com. Listener Chad Armstrong wrote in with feedback related to our episode on water chemistry. He says, one thing I believe you mentioned on an old episode was contacting your local water company and asking to speak to the chemistry department. I have since lived in two different cities in Tennessee, and both have been happy to share the local water report with me. When I lived in the Bellevue region of Nashville, they even had a spreadsheet already made up specifically for homebrewers. They were happy to discuss chlorination methods and water source. Before paying for a lab analysis, I would say give your water company a call.
Yeah, this is 100% accurate. I've lived in a few places, mostly in California lately, and I was living in Santa Barbara, and I emailed them saying, "Hey, I want to know about chloramine, water levels," and they got back to me, and they were, adamant. We will never use chloramine. There is very specific, and I like that they're very specific with that. And they publish, in most places publish a yearly report where it's kind of the averages. You just need to watch out. I mean, it's good, and it definitely, if you want to meet some nerds, water people, they definitely will appreciate your questions. But the other thing to look at is just watch out if they tend to dip into well water, because then the water will change a lot. But definitely ask them and get their feedback. And like they said, sometimes they already got stuff because I've already been asked by so many homebrewers, so they probably already have something for you.
Yeah. I love how open Chad's Water District is to sharing this information with brewers. That is awesome. The fact that they have a spreadsheet made specifically for homebrewers is pretty rad. Yeah. I was also lucky enough to speak with someone directly when I first reached out to my water company, and his name was Bob. He provided me with a very comprehensive water analysis report, was very open to answering my questions about, how they're sanitizing the water and such. Because I'm a nerd, I still ended up sending a water sample to a lab for analysis, just to be sure. And surprisingly, to me at least, the numbers were nearly identical, which only gave me more confidence in my water. Now, one thing to keep in mind with water, Chad and anyone else, is that sometimes water supplies are not consistent. They might be throughout most of the year, but like for me locally where I live here in Fresno, the area that I live, once a year they'll shut down the water plant and redirect water from south of us to my house. And I can always tell when they're doing that because my star sand gets cloudy right away. Whereas I know if I have my good water because my star sand stays nice and clear. Anyways, reach out to your water company if you don't want to spend money on a lab analysis, but spending a little cash on a lab analysis is never a bad thing either. So thank you so much for the feedback, Chad. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. We've got to take a quick break. When we're back, we'll be sharing our open and honest thoughts on dessert beer. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. I want to start off by telling a little story. Back in September of 2003, I'd brewed 3 or 4 successful batches using extract with steeping grains, and I got this idea to make a beer for an upcoming Halloween party. After what was likely just a few minutes of consideration, I settled on a caramel apple amber ale. if it's not obvious, I'd yet to learn about diacetyl and acetaldehyde at that time. After making the standard, extract amber ale wort, I dosed it with both caramel and apple extract that I snagged at the grocery store. Long story short, that beer was absolutely awful. I actually ended up giving it to a college friend of mine because it still did have alcohol in it after all. Anyway, at the time, at least to my recollection, this type of beer, this kind of sweeter play on different flavors that tend to be associated with dessert or candy, it wasn't very popular back then, but it seems to be becoming much more common these days.
Yeah. And I think, I would say if you want to look all the way back, or maybe the progenitor or origin story, I think the pumpkin spice beer is kind of the best way of thinking about it, because a pumpkin spice beer has almost really devoid of pumpkin flavor, right?
Right.
It has spices, and it's trying to mimic eating a pumpkin pie. So I would say, like, if anything, the first mover is the pumpkin spice beer.
Yeah, and so I was thinking about where did this whole dessert trend start? And I've been around the brewing scene for 20-ish years at this point. I think you're about the same.
Yeah.
It only seems like over the last 5-ish years or so that it's really become a big thing. But, in thinking about what could have started this evolution, what was the first domino, the first thing that my mind went to was pumpkin beer as well, which again does not taste, some people like to make it with pumpkin. We've done an experiment comparing a beer made with and without pumpkin.
I mean, like, the thing what people do is the first instructions say, go get the cans of pumpkins at the store.
Yeah,
right?
and then
what
put them in the oven or whatever.
Put them in the oven, yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, though, is that if ever there were a style, about 10 years ago at the very least, that drew the ire of brewers worldwide, it was pumpkin beer. You hear, I'm not a fan of this stuff. I don't hate it. I don't care if people enjoy it. But boy, I'll tell you, the controversy behind adding spices to a beer that also has pumpkin in it, that was like the first thing in brewing where I thought, geez, I didn't realize people cared this much.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, to be fair, I mean, I think we're going to ping pong between these kind of concepts today. There's drinking and enjoyment versus tradition, style, some type of ownership of the craft.
Yeah.
Right. And these are going to be the whole thing, right? Pumpkin beer, to me at least, it was always that, it's fall, it's pumpkin, pumpkin spice lattes or pumpkin stuff. But then if you think about, pumpkins aren't even harvested yet. This is clearly old pumpkin material. This is, it's kind of a lie is the point, right? So it's like, well, okay, fine. If you like it, it's good, whatever. And I've only had, maybe one of the 10 I've ever tried. I really enjoy it, right? So, yeah.
That's for me too, man. Yeah. I haven't had very many that I enjoy. But a part of the problem with that for me, as a little aside, is that the clove character just gives it. Yeah. I can't do that.
Yeah.
The phenolic, I don't want that in there. But when I think about the evolution of what we now call pastry or dessert beers, to me, you look at pumpkin beer, but that wasn't the first spiced beer. Yeah. You go all the way back to like classic traditional Belgian beers, and there are quite a few that are spiced in some way. Coriander, peppercorns. I've seen like traditional Belgian recipes that use these different spices. And you that melds really well with these kind of phenolic yeast strains that they're using as well. So to me, I can't help but wonder, again, there is that I could find, at least there's no, cohesive history of dessert beer. I think it's too modern. But in thinking about where it could have come from, there's something about it, for sharing our opinions that I appreciate, because to me, it's that kind of growth, that spin off of something that was already there anyways. And look what we've created. And now it is, I think about what influenced people to want to start doing this stuff. To me, one obvious thing is that especially for commercial brewers, but even on the homebrew scale, it's a way to keep this thing unique and interesting and to try new things. And lo and behold, a lot of people happen to enjoy it.
Well, in the end, beer is a subset of, I would say, culinary passions, right?
Sure.
Though it's very manufacturing oriented today, beer has not always been manufacturing. It's only been manufacturing in the last, hundreds or so years, right? It was very, farmhouse ales. You brew at your house, brew for yourself, almost like home brewing before it was, mechanized. So it's a part of the, what's in the, you mentioned Belgian beers. You think about that and you read some history and stuff, or read some books about it, a farmhouse ale book or something, somewhere I read, the kind of thought process behind a lot of those spicing is like spicing enough, but not so much you get it specifically, right? It's a complement to the beer, not the beer itself, right? A Belgian wit beer, I think in my mind or my opinion, the orange should be there, but the other the coriander and things, those all kind of work together in this symbiotic relationship. It's kind of like when you add garlic to a dish or add a little salt or something. These things that you can definitely taste it, but it's kind of enhancing other notes in the final product.
Yeah. Okay. That's such a good point, and I feel like that's a good jumping off point for talking about dessert beers. Traditionally, I don't actually, to be honest with you, I don't even know what that term means in the context of dessert beer here. But I think the classic perspective is that if you're throwing something into beer, you want it to be balanced. You want it to complement all of the other stuff that is in that beer. So the malt and the different hop characteristics that you can get from different varieties, the yeast character, the fermentation character that you get. It was this complementary thing, right? And so you're building this gestalt, you're building this puzzle that once it's all together, it becomes this thing that is all the different parts make this new thing that just tastes really good. I feel like dessert beer said, well, to crap with that, we're going to make all of these other things the adjunct, the star of the show.
Yeah,
exactly. And for somebody who, I tend to be pretty open-minded. I am, people for some reason got this idea that I hate IPA or that I don't like hazy beer. That's not the case at all. It's not my favorite. That doesn't mean that I hate it. I appreciate the fact that people invented this thing that's making a ton of money these days.
Yeah.
That same goes for the dessert beer. But when you have the traditionalist bent, when you've been around for as long as we have, there's a part of it that you're looking and saying, why are you even making beer? And I remember feeling, why don't you just make a slushie and put vodka in it? And that would be easier, right? But I had to take a step back, and I have friends who absolutely love these sweeter adjunct laden beers. I took a step back, and you look at it, that's a way that they're expressing their creativity. It's a way that they're taking that culinary urge, right, to do these new inventive, curiously, I think, interesting things and put it into another thing that they love, which is beer. And to be able to pump out a beer that people are sitting there drinking that is actually beer made with grain and hops and yeast. And people are drinking it saying, wow, I would never have imagined a beer could taste like that. To deny the coolness of that, I feel like is a bit odd. There's just something unique about that.
I kind of blend some ideas because it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a coincidence. There's some other podcasts who are kind of talking about, food and beer and where it is at and everything. And, their one kind of thing they brought up was, the flavors we get today are, chemically, made, right? They're engineered, right?
Yeah.
If you think about fruit in beer, fruit beers have been around forever. I think really, I can't think of another, that's other adjunct, other ingredient like fruit. And you think about, I drink a lot of, lambic and goose, and those beers specifically, add raspberries, add cherries. You don't taste a cherry the same way that it goes into a goose, right? It tastes like a creek. It tastes like a framboise. And that's what's kind of, I like is interesting, right? Because it doesn't taste like I'm eating a raspberry, which is kind of what the modern invention of these dessert beers is. Like, I want to drink a raspberry.
Yeah. That is such a good point. But I think that, again, that goes back to this discussion we were having about the balance and complementary flavors. Nowadays, rather than saying we're going to throw a shit ton of raspberries into this 3-year-old goose that we made or this 3-year-old lambic that we made, now people are saying we're going to start with the cherries and add a little bit of goose to it.
Exactly.
And it ends up, to me at least, it really does end up tasting more like the adjunct as opposed to the beer.
Actually, I think the deciding point, which is something I just kind of came up with thinking about all these notes, is it's when it gets added, right? If it's fermented versus if it's unfermented or less fermented. I think that's really the deciding point and a way to define the rules here today.
Yeah, well, and the way that I think about this, again, this is a relatively, in the grand scheme of brewing history, this is a very new idea. At least the popularity of it is. I'm sure there were people doing weird shit with beer, decades ago, centuries ago, but it's become a popular, acceptable thing these days. I was talking to my friend Brad. So Brad Gaines, I've talked about him before. He's been on the show. He is the one of the head brewers at Crone Wolf Brewing Company. And if you go to their website right now and you take a look at their tap list, they have multiple, what I would refer to as dessert beers on tap. One of them is Avenoir. It's this delicious pineapple. It tastes like a pineapple Dole Whip that you get at Disneyland, and he is so artistic and so creative and crafting these very interesting beers that I, 5 years ago, would never have thought I would enjoy. Cobblestone, one of their, That's one of their flagship sour beers that tastes like a, apple pie or apricot pie or whatever. Absolutely delicious. One of the things in a conversation I was having with Brad, this was a couple years ago, is like, what do you think is making this so popular right now amongst consumers? And I believe it was him who commented that he feels like consumers just got sick of the, every brewery or pub that you go to has 15 IPAs on tap, whether that's hazy, soft, juice bombs or bitter classic American IPA that's clear. People wanted something besides that, and what else could you offer to new drinkers to attract them, to make them want to keep coming back, that was beyond your standard beer fare? Well, this did it, so that it makes sense to me that this kind of reaction against the IPA craze ended up creating this whole new style in and of itself,
Yeah, there's kind of a weird through line I see. You had West Coast IPA, bitter, strong, and aggressively marketed. You can't handle this. Those kind of phrases. Bittering and stuff.
Yeah.
Going into hazy IPA, which is like, well, we still want hops, so we want to decrease bitterness. And honestly, sidebar, hazy IPAs are still incredibly bitter. There's so much polyphenol content in these things. I'm sorry. Don't please stop. Please, people, stop saying they're not bitter.
But anyways, it's IBU, Andy. It's all about
IBUs. It's about the IBUs. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what you see is that sweetness came back, and it's kind of cyclical. I think you're going to see this over time. You see this with winemaking. You see this in other alcoholic beverages. Go from dry to sweet to dry to sweet. And I think we kind of shot past sweetness in the hazy IPA and going into, well, seltzers became popular, really decreasing the beer flavor and then increasing everything else about, remove the beer flavorness to the thing and then accentuate other new flavors. And then what's nice for breweries, and hey, no knock on any brewery doing this, when you have these neutral bases, you can paint whatever picture you want on top of it, and then the sky's the limit. Your creativity is the limit in that regard.
So the fact that you brought up hazy IPA reminded me. Honestly, this wasn't in my notes or anything. Do you remember the milkshake IPA craze?
Absolutely.
And I remember hearing milkshake IPA 6-7 years ago, and hearing this term and going, what the hell's a milkshake IPA? Is it just a hazy IPA because it looks like a milkshake? What I learned, and maybe I was misled on this. What I learned though is that a milkshake IPA is basically a hazy IPA with lactose in it. Mm-hmm. Is that accurate?
Or vanilla? I think
both, right?
Or both. Yeah. I think I've seen all the different permutations of, especially in beer judging. I mean, I don't, this is not about home brewing specifically. This is more of a kind of a craft beer, homebrew kind of discussion of dessert beer. But in home brewing, if you go to judge, you're going to see, specialty herb, spice, vegetable, and people are doing everything. But one of the best beers I had that was very controversial, it was a hazy IPA where you added lactose. It was sweet, right? And I would have called that a milkshake. I think. I don't know if the brewer that brewed it would, but when it got vanilla or lactose, I mean, yeah, it's accentuating the sweetness that we're already desiring from that style. So it's kind of reinforcing it. But of course, you can take it too far, and then you get into dessert beer, I would say, or something else.
Well, and that's the thing, is where's that line? I mean, we could think, if you think back to the last decade-ish, and you think of, beers that made it onto the market, that got a lot of, fanfare, really, got a lot of attention because of how unique they were. There's quite a few. We'll talk about some of those. But I don't know, at what point did that first person say, well, I'm going to take this to the extreme? Because I do feel like, and rightfully so, this is not a diss, I do feel like dessert beers, again, I already mentioned it before, but they said, well, we're going to take your balance and we're going to flip it on its head. We're going to go extreme on the adjunct flavor stuff, and we're going to try to do it as best we can. Quick question. I did a little bit of research about dessert beers and some people calling them pastry beers. We've all heard the term pastry stout. Do you know, is there where did these terms come from? Because I feel like dessert beer is kind of the umbrella, and then the pastry term kind of fits underneath that.
Yeah. So there's a beer blogger. He was anonymous for many years. Don't Drink Beer. His name's Alex Kidd. He has a podcast and everything. And he was writing these excellent long form beer reviews, right? And he just did a phenomenal job. And around 2017, because there was actually an article about this. Someone wrote an article about pastry stouts. Around 2017, he coined the term on Instagram or whatever. The term pastry stout is kind of a pejorative to. Or pastry beer as a pejorative to people making these beers, basically because all they want to eat is candy or soda, right? They don't want a beer, they want something else, right? I think that being a pejorative term, pastry, kind of knocking it. I think what the craft community did says, well, let's come up with a term for this so that it's easy to market, right? We don't use this term. So dessert beer came out, and it makes sense because these are beers that are, well, honestly, they taste like dessert, or they could be thought of as dessert, rather like, hey, with your meal, I'm not going to have a scoop of ice cream or a piece of cake. I just want like 4 or 5 ounces of like this super adjunct, super flavorful beverage, and that's what I'll have.
There is an element of fun in it, and that's the part. Like I have a feeling when people saw that we were gonna, this Brews Views episode was focused on dessert beer, that they were thinking that we were gonna bash it. Do I brew dessert beers? No, I don't want 5 gallons of that stuff on tap at my place. But I'll tell you, there's something about it that I just find really fun. Now, what I thought would be kind of fun is to go back a little bit and just hit on some of what we believe to be, and I'm sure that we're going to have different opinions on this, but what we believe to be some of the earlier kind of, again, those early dominoes in this long line of what ultimately became dessert beer. I cannot help but think and talk about the very first time I ever tried Belching Beaver's peanut butter stout. I think they call it peanut butter and milk stout or something like that.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, how in the world do you get peanut butter flavor into your beer? Well, of course, everybody now knows you buy PB2, which is like a peanut butter powder, which I have friends who have used, and that beer is surprisingly delicious. I mean, I love peanut butter, I love chocolate, I love stout, so it's no wonder that I would enjoy this beer. How many peanut butter beers came out after Belching Beaver released that?
So many. I mean, in home brewing, I saw them as some. Yeah, I think once people figured out PB2, there's actually some newer tech out there. I've seen there's all these artificial flavoring companies that have started to market to craft brewers too, to get more peanut butter flavor. Just for me and for my experience with peanut butter, the peanut butter fades over time, so you don't get that retaining of that peanut flavor with PB2, but it's very popular, and that's got to be one of the first ones because it was playing up that accelerating that sweetness and being very dessert forward. I think it made them tons of money, and that brewery I think that brewery succeeded as well as it did because of peanut butter.
It had to have. And now I believe Belching Beaver, I've had some of their standard beers and they're really quite good, but I believe they make other pastry beers or dessert beers as well. Yes. And they do it well. I mean, they're successful for a reason. Another one, when I think of dessert beers, I think of kind of 2 camps, right? You've got the sweet, indulgent camp, and then you've got the fruity dessert style camp.
Yep.
And I was thinking back, what were some of the earlier popular fruit beers on the market? There was it was a strawberry blonde ale, I believe. I forget what the brewery was that made it, but they were huge back in the late 90s. But the first one that comes to my mind that I felt like did it well, and I would not classify this as a dessert beer based on today's understanding of what that means, is 21st Amendment's Hell or High Watermelon. The fruity watermelon characteristic that's in this American wheat beer, and they happen to actually make it work really well with real watermelon.
And I think it's one of the first that captured watermelon correctly, right?
Exactly.
And that's a technical feat and also unique in the marketplace, and I think that's why they succeeded. I mean, I think a lot of people know 21st Amendment from all the stuff work they did in the brewing network, but you still had the claim to fame in San Francisco as a really great craft brewery, and it's been around for 20 years now, and definitely one of their beers those beers put in a real strong mark specifically in the craft scene for new, I would say, kind of out of the box ingredients in terms of fruit.
And you think about, yes, that is not a dessert beer. That is a classic fruited, wheat beer, whatever. But I've talked to a lot of people who make these dessert beers, who really appreciate, brewing these and drinking them, who look back at the peanut butter stout from Belching Beaver, the Hell or High Watermelon from 21A, as inspirations. It was this that kind of inspired us to take it to the extreme, to do these crazier things. And now look what you've got. Slushy beers. I mean, have you been to one of these breweries that actually has like an icy machine with their beer in it?
Yes. I have very distinct memories. I was in New York at Other Half, and we were picking up cans. They mostly they're very famous for making hazy IPAs, but they're also really getting a hand at making, some people call them smoothie beers or slushy beers. And it was like a, what did they call it? They called it like maple nut crunchy. And it was like had granola and like blueberries and stuff. And they had it churning in the slushy machine, and they would pour it, right? They would pour it, and then it would be in a cup, and they would give you a spoon. It was hilarious. I was a little cringe, but But now, I mean, honestly, I can't. I think now, and as I go around, because I'm at 1 or 2 breweries a week, or if I'm on travel, I'm probably at 3 or 4 breweries. I think more often than not, I'm seeing the slushy machine at least in the background, maybe not fired up, but it's in the building. It's ready to go because it's like, here's another way to sell. Here's another way to sell this product, and it's fun, right? Like we said, all this is going to get back to how much fun can we have for the money we're spending. Yeah,
there is this again. We're gonna hit on the fun part of it. I honestly, when I think of all of these different versions of what we're terming dessert beer, fun is the biggest term that goes with it. I mean, people are doing it to have a good time, and if you want to be the crotchety old person who's sitting in the back, demeaning people because they're trying new things, then go ahead. It's your prerogative. Yeah. I don't share that sentiment. I think it's really neat that these people are doing that. That being said, I hate smoothie beers. I've had plenty of them when it leaves pulp in my teeth when I'm done drinking it. I don't want that. But if somebody else enjoys that, more power to you. I think that's so cool. And don't get me wrong, I've had a few of these smoothie beers where I'm drinking it going, this one actually tastes good because of the fact that it's not pulpy. It has this really nice body, but it goes down like fruit juice, like a smoothie. Yep. Some of them can be very, very enjoyable. I do think personally that there has to be it's easy to look at dessert beers and say, well, anybody can just throw all of that sugary crap into a beer and turn it out and call it a pie beer or whatever. Yeah. You have to be a good brewer to make these things right. You have to be I think you have to understand balance and food and the pungency of certain flavors. If anyone has ever had an overly vanillaed cream ale, for example, it's disgusting, in my opinion. Yeah. It's really bad. Yeah. Do you want to classify that as a dessert beer? Fine. But it's not my thing. Like, I'm not going to enjoy that one. So I guess my strongest opinion here isn't against dessert beer, but it's against people not doing it properly or in a way that accentuates the flavors that you're really going after. I was talking about Cobblestone from Crow and Wolf. You drink this beer and it goes down cool. It's not too thick. It has no pulp in it, but it tastes, and I don't know how else to, I believe it has graham crackers. Yeah. Graham crackers, like dried apricot and vanilla and some cinnamon or something like that. It tastes like you are eating a pie,
Yeah. I think, and I mentioned this in the last time we talked about like adjuncts and things, the extreme, and where I really draw the line is when the beer loses shelf stability, when it's actually, going to re-ferment. Oh, geez. And you're seeing that in a lot of places today, well, which is an interesting thing. So at first, and I think the more famous one was 450 North making the pie beers, and then getting called out on it because they were marketing these beers at 6, 7, 8%, but they forgot, when you add 50% fruit, your alcohol content goes down. So they got written up by the alcohol board. But there's a level of, if you're not sterile filtering it or pasteurizing it, I think very common what you see now is sorbating these beers to prevent re-fermentation. These become literally pipe bombs, and it's that's where I really draw the line, because to me, or these breweries, and I won't name names, but they'll write on the can or in their brew house or their brewery when you go by them, like, keep these cold, leave these refrigerated. It's like, because it's not shelf stable, and that's where I really argue it's not really beer anymore, because now you're just making like a fruit beverage, or I don't know. I don't like that part of it. Now, if you make it shelf stable and delicious, I'm more with you there.
You make such a good point on that, and I think it deserves to be focused on. Is if you are making a beer, you could be a great brewer of regular beer and not know what you're doing with these dessert beers and literally hurt people, ruin product, waste money. Yep. The stories abound out there lately online. Yes. And it's to me, and I don't, this is, I guess, going to sound really judgmental, but it's really pathetic if you're putting out a product that is exploding in people's fridges. Come on now.
Exactly.
We know what you need to do to make sure that beer is stable. Why aren't you doing it?
Exactly.
And if you're going to trust the sorbate process, yes, we know how sorbate, what it does to yeast. Still, if you're going to back sweeten with a bunch of sugar, for you to think that maybe even a little wild yeast that's not going to spoil the beer necessarily might not get in there and re-ferment the 50% sugary fruit juice that you, come on, do the right thing. Make sure that I agree with you. That is easily the thing that I have against dessert beer the most is the shelf stability argument.
And if you have that problem in your brewery, and it's a skill. I think that's why these beers have claimed more and more market share is they're getting better at making them, right? With anything that gets refined. And if you have issues with that at your own brewery, this is, I don't know how many craft breweries listen to this podcast, but if you have issues with that, just serve it in your own brewery until you make it shelf stable, right?
Yeah.
Do those tests internally. Serve it as these Friday parties. Like, hey, we're going to have graham cracker stout. We literally added boxes of graham crackers to the stout, and we added marshmallows. We made s'mores stout or something, right? Just serve it at the brewery until you get your bottling process down pat, right? Really, really figured out, right?
Yeah.
And things happen, but if you're and I've definitely seen breweries do recalls and stuff. They own the problem.
Yep.
And those are like one-offs, right? But if you're consistently doing this, it's like, well, I don't care. Like, that's a problem. I have a problem with that. So.
Yeah, you will lose my respect very quickly, and I won't be afraid to call you out if you do that. But,
exactly.
Well, given how novel this whole concept of dessert beer is, we did do a fair amount of speculating on where it came from, how it came to be based on our experiences and our observations over the last couple of decades. I like to think that we've established that, we may not be huge dessert beer fanboys, but we certainly appreciate the creativity that goes into crafting good examples. When we come back from this break, we're going to be breaking down our thoughts on certain adjuncts and how we think they might best be used in beer. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the brew bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the brew bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a brew bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
It's become increasingly rare to visit a brewery or bar that doesn't offer at least one sweet, adjunct-heavy dessert beer, and as someone who enjoys trying new things, I've sampled quite a few of these, which has led me to developing some opinions on certain adjuncts, as well as the styles I think they work best in. Now, at least per my experience, most dessert or pastry beers rely on a combination of adjuncts, a couple of which seem to be fairly common, namely vanilla and lactose, which is also known as milk sugar, which makes sense as these ingredients are definitely associated with a dessert desserts brewers are trying to mimic. I say this because while things like vanilla and lactose may be used on their own, they're usually not in dessert beers, right? So let's start there, Andy. What are your general thoughts on vanilla in beer?
Well, vanilla for me is really the complement of a dark roasty stout, and a lot of times I think that's where it fits the best. Now, vanilla, especially in how I drink beers, I like it, in the low to moderate level. I think what we said earlier about when it gets too high, it gets kind of gross.
Yeah,
I think that's also a little bit of a process issue. I've done vanilla with some higher end extracts. I didn't like them as much as using real vanilla beans. But then at the same time, right now as we're recording this, vanilla in general in the marketplace is kind of scarce, and that's actually raised the price of vanilla beans quite a bit.
Yes.
And what you do is you get to start to get worse grade vanilla beans. Then I think that's where you get these kind of like chemical plasticky flavors, especially when you smell the beans. They don't smell very good, and then you try to use a lot of them to compensate for that, and then you just shoot yourself in the foot. So I think when done correctly, it's really nice. When it's added in the right perception. But then it's very easy to go overboard on the vanilla.
The other big fault, and I've had a few beers that were so obviously made this way, is when brewers don't want to shell out the cash to buy good quality beans and they use vanilla extract. That if you want to make a chemically flavored, now maybe you've made one with vanilla extract that you love or that you have. I have not been a fan of the ones that I'm aware have been made with extract. I don't really like cooking with imitation vanilla extract. Get the good stuff. I mean, if you're going to put it in your beer and you want to drink it, you want it to taste good, spend the extra couple of dollars to do good vanilla. Now, my opinion on vanilla in general, I've had beers that are made with just vanilla. So again, there's a popular cream ale in California called Cali Cream Ale that is known for being made with vanilla. We talked about how silly we think that is on the cream ale episode, but I hate it. I love, when I was a kid, I loved vanilla ice cream. That was my favorite when I was a kid.
Yep, me too.
So I do have this association of vanilla being a dessert, flavoring or spice. When you use vanilla on its own in certain styles and paler styles, for example, it doesn't work for me. To me, it tastes sickly. That being said, there is definitely something to be said about using vanilla to accentuate the creamy warmth of a dessert beer. And it actually does work for me. I enjoy it quite a bit, but it cannot be the primary flavor, in my opinion. Crow and Wolf, again, this is a local brewery that is known for their dessert beers, so I'm dropping their name a lot in this episode. I went over there. They were canning their latest batch. This was a month ago. They were canning their latest batch of Velvet Thunder, which is their double IPA, hazy double IPA. And so, I don't know if you've ever hung out at a brewery when they're doing canning runs, but if they have a short fill or something, whoever's standing around gets to drink the beer, right? Yep. So they handed me this beer, and I'm sipping on it going, what is different about this? Well, I didn't know, first off, that they use a little bit of vanilla in Velvet Thunder anyways. I didn't know that because it is there just to accentuate that full body creaminess, right? Well, this batch, they kind of overdid the vanilla a little bit, and it ruined the beer for me. I mean, I told Brad this. Other people loved it. They still sold the hell out of that beer.
Sure.
But for me, the only addition was that vanilla, and it just added that little extra creaminess that doesn't work in that style of beer. Now, you go to their stout. They have a delicious dessert stout that they make every once in a while. And my goodness, if it didn't have the vanilla, it would feel thin, and it wouldn't have that desserty creaminess to it. So it works really well. My whole point with vanilla, use a deft touch, use it properly. Don't overdo it. That's my opinion on that.
Well, I think you hit on something that's important, and it's something we're not probably say explicitly in this podcast. Is you mentioned how the mouthfeel or the perception of the mouthfeel changes, right? It's not that it's editing it's like propene glycol or some type of glycerin effect, right? It's adding that richness to the body that would otherwise leave it lacking. And it's very interesting and curious. And that's where I'm actually more jazzed to talk about dessert beers, is like the mouthfeel of it, right? How do you get that full-bodied richness with these ingredients, or the perception of it? And I think that's super cool.
Well, I love how you, I appreciate how you use the term the perception of body, because there are a lot of things that you can do that don't actually change the viscosity of a beer.
Exactly.
But it has this impact on the way that it's perceived. It's one of the reasons I love psychology so much and human perception in general. But vanilla to me is one of those things. It creates the impression of fullness when that fullness may not even be there. So you can get this impression of fullness and still have a very drinkable beer. You overdo the vanilla, in my opinion, again, this is Brew's views, you overdo the vanilla and it is impossible for me to get through half a pint of a beer with too much vanilla in it. Yuck.
For me, it's all, we get back to balance, that balancing segment. You want to go overboard. Well, that's bad. So sometimes they're going to go overboard in certain things. And I think there's other ingredients we're going to talk about today where going overboard is actually playing well. This is definitely one where you want to be very specific about what you're doing. And you're going to have to blend it honestly in this case. Like you didn't like this one maybe, and maybe it wasn't going to work well in their brew house. Then I would be blending it back just to make sure it's actually drinkable. Because I think like you said, there's a narrow band of where it works correctly.
Well, and that's the interesting thing is there's also this, the people have, subjective preference, right? People have their preferences. And I'll tell you, I asked them, how's the overly vanilla, Velvet Thunder doing? And they're like, well, we're not going to make it again, but it's not doing bad. It's selling off the shelves, So people like that. I feel like, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, everybody's mindset, their palates were focused on hoppy. And even people were able, remember the lupulin shift and all that talk about palates. And I feel like people are doing this kind of dessert beer shift right now. And the vanilla thing is very popular. It really does create that. Another ingredient, and I feel like these two go hand in hand. There are so many dessert beers that will always have at least some amount of vanilla and lactose or milk sugar. And the thing about lactose that I think a lot of brewers like using it for is that it's non-fermentable. So you can add it without worry that the yeast is going to re-ferment it. So you do get a very real, increase in FG and perceptible sweetness. Some say if you've ever tasted lactose on its own, to me, it's not terribly sweet, but if you use enough, it'll add some sweetness to a beer.
Yeah, it's such an interesting ingredient. Again, like vanilla, I've had, like I mentioned earlier, this hazy IPA that had lactose. It to me it perceives sweetness, and I don't know if that's because it was adding sweetness. Like you said, if you just taste lactose, and don't forget, there's going to be a yeast at some point that'll ferment lactose. So just hold your tongue until that we find that. Yeast until Cade interviews that yeast biologist.
There you go.
So you get this. It's like 2 + 2 = 5. A lot of stuff is 2 + 2 = 5. That hazy IPA had that fruity, juicy body, right? And then when you add that lactose, it almost just ties everything together to enhance everything, right? And so by itself, it's not really anything until it gets the little extra boost. So
I've my friends, I'm kind of known in my local brewing friend group here as being the beer flavored beer guy, and so they love to trick me. And as the experimental dude, I take it. I take the blows. Yeah. Brad has done this a few times where he'll serve me a beer. He's like, just tell me what you think. I don't want you to overthink it yet. I'll drink it. And I'm trying to be unbiased. I've gotten to the point where I pretty much know when he's doing that, it's a lactose beer because he wants to prove to me that you can really enhance a sweeter dessert style beer by adding lactose, and he's getting me. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm starting to. I've changed my mind. There are so many beers that he makes now where I'm like, God damn, you couldn't do this without this amalgamation of vanilla, lactose, and then whatever else he adds to it. Now, the thing about lactose is adding that to beer is nothing new. If anybody's ever had a cream stout or what we call milk stout, that's what makes it that is you're making a stout and you're adding lactose to it to enhance that sweetness in that body, and it works really well. I love me some cream stout. So the fact that you would take that and then you might add a little bit of vanilla and then you would complement that with some other adjuncts, it all, again, part of that evolution into where dessert beer came from. So again, to me, when you look at the palette of a dessert beer, when you look at that, the paint palette of a dessert beer, you've got lactose, vanilla, almost always are going to be in a dessert beer. And then you've got everything else. Let's talk about the everything else now.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing, of course, we've already talked about other spice or vegetable, but now when you have that first base coat of sweetness, how do you enhance it? And I think traditionally, or not, or the last decade or so of these, you go to spices. You're thinking cinnamon, allspice, nutmeg, ginger, peppercorn. All of these were probably used in beer before. They've definitely been used before. I think my second or third beer that I actually made was a stout with cinnamon in it, right? And these are classic. And then once you already have that sweetness, what do you add to make it desserty? Just add these spices, and these things work really well. And I think this is kind of where the wheelhouse of dessert beer is, right? It's not crazy. It makes sense because you've seen them before, and they're very approachable ingredients. Absolutely. And when you think about, to me at least, I consider chocolate a spice. All right. I mean, I don't know where you'd fit that in other than spices. So
you think about how popular was using, cacao nibs or chocolate powder, right? Cocoa powder in stout. Now you add a little bit of vanilla, you add a little bit of lactose, and now you've got this genuinely dessert flavored beer that actually works. You add a little bit of cinnamon. Now you've got kind of a pie flavored or a cookie flavored beer.
Yes.
I remember a buddy of mine years and years ago, before I'd ever even considered the term dessert or pastry beer, made an oatmeal stout that he added some vanilla in as well. And this tasted like an oatmeal cookie. It was freaking awesome. These are dessert beers to me, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of the genesis of where this thing began.
I think a key, and I think this is overarching, and I'll just mention it here because it's a good place to add it when you think about making these, is what separates these from other beers, along with these levels of ingredients, right? We're talking almost like 3 to 5. It needs like at least three ingredients to become a dessert beer, right? You can't get away with one or the other because you just be a spiced or vegetable.
I feel the same way, yeah.
Yeah, you have to have the mouthfeel correct.
Yes.
And I think that's something that's going to come through. And if you overwork these spices, right? Oh, I love cinnamon. A lot of people don't like cinnamon. I love this or I love that. If you don't nail the mouthfeel, that richness, that like you're eating it almost,
Yeah.
it's not going to make the cut, in my opinion. So just be careful with how you add these things, because these are actually sometimes negative to mouthfeel. They'll add that spiciness, that dryness,
Yes,
that is going to counteract the lactose and vanilla and everything else you added. So it's like it's a little bit, not a ton, right?
That is the experience that I've had when people overuse nutmeg in beer. Nutmeg has that drying kind of weird, leaves kind of a numbness on your tongue.
Yes.
If you overdo it in beer, that comes through. At least that's been my experience. Now, you use just the right amount. You don't overdo it. You can get some really phenomenal flavors out of a beer.
Absolutely.
I said it before. I'll say it again. I don't know why anybody would use clove in their beer. Again, I guarantee you there's somebody out there who has done it successfully and enjoys the beer. I was trained to identify phenolic off flavors, and clove is a phenol. That is all my brain goes to. I wish I could change that, but it's been difficult to do that.
Me too, man.
I can't do it. Yeah. Now, one more comment on the spices. What I've found personally, I can't recall at least ever having a beer paler than, say, a red ale that was spiced that I really genuinely enjoyed. To me, spices tend to work best in darker styles: amber ale, brown ale, porter, stout. Now, like you, I've tried probably 15 or 20 different quote unquote pumpkin beers. I've had maybe one or two that I thought were decent. The ones that I've enjoyed the most aren't actually pumpkin beers. They're these pie beers,
Yes.
that tend to taste more like pie, and they overemphasize the pie piece of it as opposed to just adding these spices to it. But I do like, again, I tend to prefer the spiced characteristic in darker styles.
Absolutely. I think it just works better. I think the roast already provides the chocolate, because in a pale beer, right, what are you looking towards? Well, you're looking at malt, which is kind of just like vague sweetness.
Yeah.
So you need those other ingredients kind of amp everything up together.
Yeah, I agree. All right. After spices, of course, there's fruit. And I again, when I think of dessert, I think of either spicy cake type stuff, or you've got your kind of fruit tarts and all of that. There are certain fruits that just work amazingly well in beer in general. Fruits have been used in beer for eons. We know that. Again, when you add the fruit plus maybe a little lactose and a little vanilla, that's when you get into dessert beer territory, in my opinion. I mentioned it before. Crown Wolf has this beer on tap right now called Avenoir, and it tastes like Dole Whip. I love pineapple. If you love pineapple, you would love this beer. It is got pineapple, lactose, and vanilla in it, and this stuff is phenomenally good. We actually blend it with a Berliner Weiss that they've got on tap right now, and it's so incredibly good. And that's what I'm trying to say is, like, I would never have thought that this guy, Marshall, would enjoy what is ultimately a smoothie beer. I can't get enough of this stuff. It's super good. So when you do it right, use those fruits and use a ton of those fruits. The one thing I hate is when somebody says, "Hey, we've got this, berry sweet beer or whatever," and you taste it and you're like, "Where's the berry at?" It's a little bit colored. I get that, but I want to taste if you're going to call this thing a dessert beer, if you're going to say it tastes like an oatmeal cookie, I want it to taste like a damn oatmeal cookie. Yeah,
that's very critical, right? I think what you've seen in the last, I'll say, like, we're talking the 5 to 10 year range, is that people are making these kind of beers, but still leaving it on the beer side.
Yeah.
Critical for this is that you have to really leave beer away, which is kind of sad in a way, but it's also, that's another thing you can make. These, in the end, these are businesses. They're going to make things that people want to buy. And like you said, you love this. You never thought you would love it. And hey, there's a new beverage, right? Kinda almost like a new beverage. And so you got to really lean in. And like we said earlier about when you add it and how you add it, you want it to not have the fermented raspberry character. You want it to be, this is raspberries. And you can do this with fruit. I mean, this is very easy. Like we said, you could add this post-fermentation, don't have any fermentation. You can also enhance it, and something we kind of I think we touched on or in other episodes was when you make it, you kind of want to combine the real fruit with maybe a little of the extract to kind of get two kind of sides of that same thing to really enhance the whole thing. And so that's how you can really get that punch in your face kind of character.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, I know that some of the local breweries around here who are kind of emphasizing the more dessert styles right now are using they're not extracts, but they're using like concentrates that they get in these
concentrates,
big bags. Yeah, and those are real fruit, but it concentrates that flavor, so you're not putting as much vegetal matter necessarily in the beer. Another really interesting fruit a lot of people view as a vegetable that can work incredibly well in certain styles of beer is cucumber. I had a cucumber goza recently, and man, oh man, talk about refreshing, right? I mean, if you like cucumber, it tasted just like a cucumber, but would that classify as a dessert beer? I'm not sure.
I mean, cucumber, I think I've had some excellent, usually using sours like Goza or, Berliner Weiss. I think it works really well. It is definitely one where it can be easily too much, right? Of course. But it's cool. And that fruit, when those things all come together, when there's like 3 or 4 other ingredients, kind of like when you have cucumber in a salad or something like that, when they're all come together, it's like, oh, this is great. Put some cherries in there, put some pineapple in there. That's kind of, it becomes a fruit salad almost in that regard.
Yeah. No. So I love, stone fruit, another local brewery, House of Pendragon. You've heard me talk about them a ton. They've got a peach, I think they've got a beer, a hazy IPA called Qui-Gon Gin and Juice. Big fan of Star Wars, the brewer there, Tommy is. But I believe he uses that as a base for playing around with fruits, and he makes these fruit additions. I'm not sure if he's putting lactose or vanilla in the beer at all, but I'll tell you, it really, when you've got hops that tend to, lean into that kind of stone fruit character, and then you add stone fruit to it, I'll tell you, it's quite tasty. It can be really good.
There's another ingredient. I was just thinking about other beers in the fruit sector. What I'm seeing a lot more of use today, which I think is kind of interesting, is in the even terms of dessert beer in general is new, is banana. I'm personally not a banana fan. I usually walk away from that. But I think what they're doing is adding banana chips, like dehydrated banana chips, to get that flavor. And I'm just seeing a lot more of it. I don't know if you've seen them in the beers or breweries you've been at, but I'm just seeing that's one thing in it. And the ones I've had, I have like literally a sip, not like a 4-ounce pour, like literally a sip. They nailed the banana. The banana flavor is real. It's a real deal. So if you like bananas, I think there's a trend going that direction right now.
Well, it's got to be 20 years old at this point, that banana bread beer that they have it at like Bevmo and stuff.
Sure.
But I again, that's another one that's like clove to me, where if I taste banana, even if it is an embellishment of banana, to me it's gonna be isoamyl acetate, and that's all I'm gonna taste.
Exactly.
And that's a characteristic I expect in 1 or 2 different styles out there, but I kind of want gone and everything else. Now I could see, again, I'm not the expert at brewing these things, but I could see using banana chips or banana flavoring even to create maybe a banana cream pie type of a pale pastry beer, right? And that would work with some vanilla and some lactose. That makes sense to me. So again, I'm open-minded when it comes to this stuff. So you've got your spices, you got your fruit. I feel like the slushy beers, all of that stuff, a lot of people are focusing on that. And then you've got your kitschy crap. This is where I think our opinions are going to get a little bit stronger. People, how many times have you logged into Facebook and you see some small craft brewery dumping bags of cereal into their, into breakfast cereal, into their mash, or throwing box after box of donuts or cake or bread,
You just have these guys on these brew decks. It's a very classic picture of them smiling and throwing in a mash tun. And then you just have the head brewer in the background saying, I did not go to master brewer school for this bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
For this bullshit.
Here's the thing about that I have an issue with. I've had beers that are made this way. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't get how do I say this properly? If it is contributing to a noticeable or perceptible flavor difference in that beer, it's usually more slight than what you would get if you had used other ingredients to achieve the characteristics you're going after. Yeah, so if what you want is your beer to taste like Lucky Charms, add some fruit to it, add a little bit of lactose and vanilla, and you'll create the impression of that fruity marshmallow thing.
Yes.
You're not going to taste, I've had Lucky Charms that I say that because remember that can that was going around a couple years ago that was all, I got to taste that. It was horrible, I thought, first off, but also it didn't taste like Lucky Charms. It tasted like a mess,
Yes. Yeah. It's these are a lot of times, I think, there's a few I've seen, like at least for marketing elements and stuff or perception, right? Again, if it's got Lucky Charms on the can, you might perceive it a little stronger, right? And then taste it, right? Be chemically actually present in the beer. But these are also fun, and inevitably they'll say, "Hey, well, you're brewed with Lucky Charms," then 8 other things, because there was no way they're going to get the flavor without using 8 other things in the beer. So, the other ones like making donuts, or I think one famous, or I'd say infamous, was when Rogue was making these voodoo donuts type of beers. Those went nationwide. Though I will say that was kind of more of a earlier version of what I would call dessert beer, because those beers were still quite alcoholic to me.
Oh yeah,
and not very, they were sweet but not fulling. Like I think the key here is this mouthfeel, this balance, where the balance is in these beers is the mouthfeel and making them taste rich without being too cloying and not alcoholic and not hot. And so you have those kind of beers where they're trying to lean in not only in on those flavors, but then the marketing elements of like Voodoo Donuts is like famous donut place in Portland, that kind of thing. So you get that. Other things are, adding sheet cakes to the mash tun and stuff. And it's kind of ridiculous. But, again, these are working on multiple angles. One is the flavor, but the other is the perception of that flavor because you saw someone or saw something like that happen. So
I'm to a fault. I appreciate being frank and honest and all of that. And my wife and I were having this conversation a couple weeks ago about how, like, when I asked her, I said, so when you type out, when you're texting somebody and you type out, haha, like, are you actually laughing? Or like, I have to, it's like this obsessive thing that I do. Like if I type haha, I laughed so that I'm not sending the wrong impression to the person. Right. Or people who type LOL, like, are you actually laughing out loud? Cause you're saying that you are. I wonder if there's not a kind of a similar sentiment when people want to, like, oh, this is going to be a pie beer. Well, we should throw at least one pie in there, so we're not lying to our consumers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's the thing. So, you add pie to beer. I believe there was a collaboration brew between Crow and Wolf and House of Pendragon last year. Maybe I know it was during COVID, where they did this sour pie ale, and there was a picture online, kind of like you described it, where the both brewers were hanging out throwing full pumpkin pies into this mash tun. Mm-hmm. It's fun. It's kitschy. I like the marketing. I actually appreciate the marketing component to that. I think it brings people in. It makes people laugh. That's a beautiful thing. To say that there's that piece of it. And if we can own it as just being kind of a marketing ploy, fun for people to look at, is it contributing anything to the beer as a whole? I highly doubt it. We've all made additions thinking that it would be fun, and you get to the end and you're like, where the hell did it go? I don't get that. Yeah. I think, again, my point in this is that if you take all of the parts of what that pumpkin pie is and you make your additions to the beer in a fine-tuned way, you're going to get more out of those components separately than you are by just throwing a cake into your beer.
Yeah. And, I was just searching right now, just get some of the original guys. There's Cocoa Puffs beer, the Lucky Charms. There's all these things. So it's like, well, there's a lot of nostalgia. And again, a lot of these are going to lean on nostalgia to entice you to go and check these out, right?
Absolutely.
There's that feeling that will enhance the experience. So.
Yeah. Well, I enjoy trying unique beers, and I do tend to view the kind of the fun side of brewing in this. I don't drink dessert beers by the pint by any means.
Yeah.
There are a few that I will get, the 10 ounce or the 12 ounce pour of, like the Avenoir. But usually, if I'm doing that, I'm sharing it with other people, sharing it with my wife. But these are the kinds of things that I love to try because they're fun, and that's the beauty of dessert beer, in my opinion. I'm a huge fan, not necessarily for the drinking component, but because it's so innovative and it's so fun and creative to see what these brewers are getting away with, in their brew houses. And the fact that it's bringing more and more people, I think it's making, craft beer more appealing to a broader audience. What's wrong with that? These people are just having fun, and people are enjoying what they're brewing. And I think that's great. So that's my final opinion on dessert beers.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is evolution, of course, of the craft beer segment. There's more and more craft brewers, 8,000 last count. So, of course, you're going to get new things come out of it and bubble around. And I think what you're seeing, and I think the best part of it, like we're saying, is they're making them better and better, right? They're not making what they used to make, which was, we'll just put a bunch of stuff in the beer and here you go, enjoy. It's like, no, we're really making well-crafted beverages now. And I think you're seeing, especially for me, one of my favorite ones is Modern Times. They made a name in hoppy beers and lagers, but really, and it's ones that you can only really get online or in their club, is does, these dessert stouts, and they really nailed it in that opinion, right? Where they get the mouthfeel, they get the character. We didn't even bring up, and I think it's important just to touch on, a lot of these get barrel aging.
Oh yeah.
So they're getting that flavor too, enhancing the mouthfeel, the richness with the vanillins and the tannins from the barrel, and then everything comes together. And I'm a big fan of it. And once we can get back to bottle shares, we can each have 4 ounces of pastry stout. So
yeah. Well, and again, I think the main point here is that we're recognizing that this isn't a joke anymore. This isn't just people, throwing stuff. It's real, and people are doing a great job. They're taking it seriously, and I'm happy with where things are going in the world of dessert beers. So there you have it, folks. Our thoughts, our opinions on dessert beers. Don't forget to subscribe to our newest show, The Brew Lab, where host Kay Jobe goes into the lab with brewing scientists to discuss research they've performed, and make sure to keep up with all of our beer and brewing antics over at brewlosophy.com. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.